Hello and welcome to today's episode of Just Call Dad, where we are creating a team of dads who are just a call away. I believe, and so do my guests, that we have the opportunity as dads to be there for our kids, for our family, and most importantly, for ourselves. Today's guest, Joe, is going to tell you about what his life as a dad looks like, what he does to help himself daily, and what he can do to help you and help me be just a call away. Joe, how are you today?
Very good. I love that intro too. That's such a
Thank you.
so poignant and exactly what we want to talk about. Perfect.
Yeah, thanks. As an educator, we get some practice on our introductions, right?
Oh yeah, definitely five. I mean, it's probably more times a day. It's only 3 times a day for me on the block schedule, but
Right.
it's for you a lot. You know what I meant. This is. I mean, I don't know what off topic right away, but
I love
I
it.
used
Let's go.
to I used to teach in a Catholic school, and every day you started class with "Let us remember we're in the holy presence of God." And it was such an easy way to get everyone silent. And now that I work at a public school, I obviously can't do that. So it's like, all right, guys,
Right.
like settle down. But I was just like, I always want, maybe on my last day working there, I'll just be like, let us remember in the holy presence of God and just see how the kids
See how it goes for
react to
you,
it.
right?
Yeah. But it was a
Yeah.
great starter every time. Perfect.
Perfect intro. Here we go. All right, Joe, tell us about yourself. I really want to just kind of get our audience. I know you. I've had the privilege of working with you and feeling just the power that your presence brings to my life, but our audience doesn't know that. So I want to hear who is, better yet, Joe Bush.
Yeah, Joe Bush is figuring out who Joe Bush is and continuing to figure out and always growing. The number one thing is my faith. Is that's kind of like the umbrella, and I would say probably, about a decade ago, I made a decision that I was going to put. I grew up Catholic, but I was going to put Christ at the center of everything, and I lived my life a decade ago very compartmentalized. I was one way as a teacher, one way as a coach, one way as a parent, another way in my faith, and then I just kind of put God at the center to try to get in better alignment with who it is that I want to be. So I would say right now what I am dedicated to is really education, service, and inspiration of other people, and trying to get others to unlock their potential and see what's on the other side of what they want to do and their goals physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially. I teach a leadership class in a high school. I do personal coaching. I coach my son's basketball team. I do a lot of financial literacy education. I also go and do public speaking, both in the private sector, the public world, as well as in churches. But it all falls under that, how can I serve and how can I inspire other people in everything that I do?
Joe, I love so many of the things that you just said right there. And I think what I would like to really focus in on for our audience is the idea that you don't have to be perfect, right? You are somebody who works with people in their mindset. You literally coach that, yet you're not perfect. And I think that's something that I want our audience, especially our dad audience and educator audience that's listening to this, because that's what you and I really, if we were to, I have a jersey hanging up here, and in a lot of my books I talk about what jersey are you wearing, and when we go different places we put those jerseys on, and oftentimes we take the jersey off to put the next one on. It's like a constant change process, and it sounds like to me there's nothing wrong with that process, but as you do that, you really don't always know who you are, right? And as a dad, I think, and an educator, we constantly are changing who we are to meet the situation that we're in. And I wonder if in this season of your life, if you're coming to grips with the fact that Joe's jersey or who Joe is can exist and coexist with all of those things without having to change based on the audience that you're around. And I think that's a really powerful thing for people to hear, that even mindset coaches, educators, people who are in leadership are still learning how to be proud of the jersey or who they are in every circumstance. Would you agree with that statement, Joe?
Absolutely. That it always starts with who you want to be as opposed to what you want to be. And I'm actually the first podcast I'm releasing on December 31st talks about this concept of, what do you want to be? We spend all this money in college, we get a job, we get a career, but it really comes down to who it is that you want to be. And the other part of that is it's continually evolving. That, you have the fork in the road and you choose A or B, and you choose B, and then a little bit down the road there's another fork, and then you choose C or D, and you continue to go. So I look in my faith journey, especially, like, if anyone says what's God doing in your life, for me it's he's working on me continually. And, I thought I, hit a peak when I figured things out at age 30. And then you have kids, and it's like, all right, now I got to figure out some new things. And then the job changes, and then your relationship changes, and then you go back to school. So you're constantly evolving. And what I really try to focus on with my clients and even with my students is, who do you want to be? What's the underlying value that you have in your life? And how can you prove that value to yourself through the actions that you have? And, to go a little bit deeper, I'm on this sober journey now. And the number one regret I always had with drinking was that I wasn't the person that I should have been on Friday night that I was on Sunday morning, so to speak. And that always crushed me. Was I got up and I regretted the things I said, I regretted the things that I did, and I was in misalignment with who I wanted to be. And so now that I'm doing that, it's like I've got the podcast, I'm doing a little bit of writing, I'm talking with people like you, my classes are so much better. I am the person that I want to be, but I'm also still evolving to do things better and do things different to continue to grow.
I really want to focus in again on two things that you said. The first thing is that growth piece that I want to talk about. And the second thing that I want to talk about is the decisions and choices that you've made. So, for example, with the growth, as an educator and as somebody who is successful in our jobs, we feel very proud of the product that we produce, which is helping people. And as educators, we really want to help everybody that we meet. And sometimes that can almost be an addictive thing to help people, to where we almost never fix ourselves in that process. And so as we go through that kind of second piece that I would really like to talk about, not only that, but what does it look like to grow? And I think that's the choices that we make. Sometimes we have to make tough choices to deal with those things. And oftentimes, and specifically as dads, we walk through our lives and act like everything is fine. And we find a coping mechanism for that. For me, recently, I've been walking through a season where I have had to come to grips with the fact that I have let anxiety live inside of me and grow to the point where it actually has taken control over some of my life. And I have been made aware, because of some physical issues that have arisen, that I can no longer live that way. And I think whether it's drinking, whether it's trying to help people, whether it's, disconnecting from our family, finding a way to do something, we can take even healthy things and unhealthy things and begin to use those as coping mechanisms to try to handle life. And I think what you're saying, and what I want to really talk about today, is this idea that when we begin to let go, we begin to let things into us that are the right things. Instead of holding on, I think of it like a barbell. As you're taking the weights off, we can begin to put the right weights on that we can actually lift and potentially co-lift together with other people. Your podcast is a great example, something that we're going to make sure is linked inside of our podcast and connected, because you're interviewing people who are, yes, they look like they have it all together, but there's been a process that no one has seen behind the scenes to create that person that you see. So what I would like to kind of focus in even more on, now that we've talked about kind of making changes, making choices, how do we as dads, let's talk to our dad audience for a second, how do we work with our kids at home when maybe we work with kids at our job, maybe we work with stressful situations? How can we come home and begin to cope better with the stresses that we experience every single day?
For me, I think it starts with recognizing that your family is the most important part. And, I've helped so many kids in a variety of different ways at school. I was a varsity soccer coach, and I found myself when I was coming home and I was exhausted and I was thinking about breaking down film before I was breaking down the lives of my own kids, that was a problem. So I think number one is to pause and reflect on, all right, what is the most important thing in my life? And it's the kids. The second part, and my kids are older now, they're 15 and 12, but I've always been vulnerable with them. And I've always just said, hey, you know what, like dad needs a few minutes, or dad's going through this. And my wife and I have always tried to talk to them as if they were adults and explain that there are things, going on. So in 2013, my father passed away, and my sons were 4 and 1, and it's hard to explain to a 4-year-old the fact that you're sad, but we did our best to do it in some sort of capacity. And in 2019, my wife got breast cancer, and we talked to our kids about, hey, mom's going to go through a procedure. Like it's going to be a little bit tough. It's going to be okay. We're going to work through it. If you guys have any questions, so being open and vulnerable is really, really important for your kids. And I only saw my dad cry 2 times in my entire life. The first, he was watching the movie JFK, which I had no context for when I was
Sure.
like a little kid, but that was like his own history. And then the second was when my mom passed away. I was like, I grew up thinking my dad was born in 1929, right before the Great Depression. And I remember just thinking like, hey, dads, like they can't be vulnerable. They've got to be tough. I always start with that concept of being vulnerable and open to what your kids are doing, and they understanding that you can have bad days, and it's easier to walk in and be like, hey, can I just take 5 minutes, had a rough one, and then let's get back and go do something.
I really love that. I think that vulnerability piece is what a lot of dads miss. I would say this. I was driving yesterday with my family through the lights. There's a little light show that's local where you can drive your car through. And I want to talk to you for just a second about, I was actually going to record a second podcast about this. I like to do shorts, like 5-10 minute little bursts for dads to listen to on their way into work or on a walk or a jog. That's part of my podcast, is like these little dad motivational moments for them. But I was thinking about two things when I was driving. First of all, I couldn't drive my car last week because of an injury that I was going through, and I was really hurting. I had let something go for years. I don't know if you've ever dealt with something like that, but it sounds like you've had that. And I can't even run right now. And I'm a runner. I used to run daily. It was my therapy. And here I am, not able to run, not able to drive my car. And it's a fixable thing, but it hurts really bad. And I wonder if vulnerability is like that. As I was driving, I was almost emotional to the point where I wanted to cry. And as a dad, I think it's super important. I have 3 daughters. They're much more emotional than me. I think it's important for them to see me cry because they can see that I have those emotions and that I'm not some big tough guy that will not feel. And so I just had a tear kind of roll down my face, and my daughter's in the back seat, so excited, looking at every light. And what I was noticing is she was excited about that moment. And had I not gotten in the car and decided I was going to drive, we wouldn't have had that moment together. And I thought about how many moments have I missed as a dad because I'm too busy when I get home, or because I'm too worried about the injuries physically or emotionally that I might have, and I don't want to show those to my family. And I was driving and thinking about, no one else in any car around me knows the victory that I'm experiencing in this current car that I'm in right now but me. And as dads, we have to show that type of vulnerability. And earlier you talked about your faith, Joe, and I'll be transparent. That is what has gotten me through this experience, is my faith. In knowing that, yes, everyone doesn't have to agree. The coolest thing about my podcast that I have is we've got people from all walks of life. We've got people that have all different types of belief systems, all different types of coping mechanisms. But at the end of the day, in the core of who you are, you have to have belief. And I believe that we have a purpose in this life. And so, Joe, as you share your story about your wife going through that, I feel that at an emotional level. As you share that story about losing your dad, I just recently lost my grandma, and it's not the same, but the feeling is there. And so we as dads need to be vulnerable and understand that that doesn't mean that we're going to avoid all the pitfalls in life, but instead, we're going to be able to show our kids how to cope with that. And then maybe that next generation can cope even healthier. And I want to focus in on what you just said about your dad as well. Only seeing your dad cry a couple times. I connect with that. I wonder if we can elaborate on that just a little bit. So, Joe, as a life coach, as someone who works with people, how do you connect with them emotionally, knowing what you've walked through personally? How does that help you connect with that person?
Well, it starts with the rapport, and I always try to go deep very quickly. And even in my class that I teach, I talk about my experiences of like my mom passing away when I was 17, and I teach all seniors and losing my father, losing my brothers, and why I teach the class that I teach is part of that, because I want to give kids a reference point, a shortcut, so they don't have to stumble through life like I did. And I think the same is true for the coaching, is to go deep early and to explain to people, although like you talked about your grandmother, like your grandmother's not the same as losing your dad, but like I don't, my grandparents were gone before I was born. So like I don't know that. And everybody has their own experience with loss or with grief. And so you have that little bit of empathy that exists to say, hey, I'm here. I've been through this experience. It might be a little bit different than yours, but the best part is we can get through this together. And what I love about what you're doing here is this building of community. And sometimes a lot, when I'm talking with my life coaching clients or when I'm talking with my students, a lot of it is them just needing to express their feelings. Like they don't need me to fix it. And that's probably my greatest weakness. Like, well, let me just solve that problem. They're like, no, actually, I just talked about it and I feel a lot better. And that's what I love. You and I have had several conversations, and I've connected with people that you've connected with too. And just having those conversations and being like, gosh, you know what? I'm not alone. I'm not alone in this podcast. I'm not alone in my writing journey. I'm not alone in my coaching journey. Really makes it so much better. And I think this, going back to the part about our kids, recognizing that they're not alone, that they have someone to love and support them is really, really important. And I think if you can do that as a dad, you've won. To know that they're going to come to you and share things with you.
Joe, I think that might be the most powerful line that our dads need to hear, and that's that idea of just being there for them is the victory. Just being there. So many dads, I was looking at a statistic about this when I started this podcast, and it was kind of one of my motivators, was how many dads and how many men commit suicide yearly. And I have never personally been touched by that, like in a close friend, but I had a friend who told me about someone who was. And I thought about, Joe, I wonder how often those men talked about how they felt. I wonder if they knew that if they could just get a little bit of those emotions out, if that would change their outcome. I don't know. I can't tell you if it would, but I can tell you this much. There's a lot of power in just sharing how you feel. And I want to be the kind of dad that is there just like you are. And one thing that I would say, Joe, is for me personally, if you're out there looking for somebody to work with you or to coach you or to help you through something, I want them to find you, Joe, because here's the reality. It just takes one person to make such a great change. And so I want to make sure if you're listening to this podcast right now and you're dealing with anything emotionally that you feel like is not okay to talk about, you need to talk about it. There's a power in letting go. And so somebody like Joe can change your life. I know just working with Joe in a friendship has changed mine. And I want to be that kind of person as well. Joe, I wonder if we could stop here and just talk about writing for a second. I know you're an author. I'm an author. We're working on a kid's book that's going to be released here in around April called The Emotional Shoes. It's a part of a series where we're going to be helping kids with emotional resilience and with dealing with finishing different places in races and sports and all the things that go with those emotions that kids have a hard time processing as athletes. I have 30 years of experience with competitive athletics, 15 years coaching, and beyond that competing. And so as writers, we write about things that matter to us. And you and I are both going to be in a book, and I want to talk about that for just a little bit. And I would like you to kind of lead that conversation and tell us about what is that book? What does it mean to you? What's just a little bit about what you're going to be writing about? Because I think it ties into what we're talking about right now.
Absolutely. First, I wanted to say how amazing you are at analogies, like the emotional shoes. And earlier you talked about lifting weights and putting different weights on there. Like you
Yeah.
paint such a good picture of what people are going through. And I can't wait to see the emotional shoes book because I get the concept of what it is. And I want to dive deeper into that because it's just such a good picture of like, and you've talked about like, I'm carrying this, like I'm carrying a backpack and it's like, can you release the backpack? Like it's so good to hear. And hopefully people can run with that. As for the book, yeah, so thank you because you connected me with Aaron, who's putting together this book, and it's a collective. It's a collective of 10 or 15 different authors, and really the focus is to get our stories out there. And this one is very faith focused. And for me, I'm just so excited to have the opportunity to know that I can put this in the hands of my audience, and someone can read chapter 6, whatever chapter 6 is, and they can run with that, or someone can read the chapter that you write and they can connect and they can run with. So it really is the focus on building community, which is really important, and what I love that you're doing, because we are definitely better together than we are alone. And for my part of the book, I've been going back and forth. I've been writing all month, and really the focus is kind of the story of my sobriety and how I came from this family of addiction. And my dad on my mom's side, my brothers, I lost two brothers to addiction, and I want to just tell that story, because I think it comes down to this for my faith life. There's always one thing. There's one thing that holds us back, and we see it several times in the Bible. I gotta let me go and bury my father, or when Sodom and Gomorrah is falling, like let me just look back. Let me see what that was like. No, you're told not to. So I love Gary Keller's book called The One Thing, and he says, "What's the one thing you can do? Such by doing makes everything else easier or unnecessary." And like I tried to fix my diet, I tried meditation, I tried all these different things, and God just kept saying, "Dude, just give up the drinking. Just give up the drinking and like watch everything unfold." And so now I don't know, 140 days or something, so almost 5 months since I have had a drink, and there's just been so much good that has happened. The community is building, the coaching has been great, the teaching has been great. And so that's my focus, is to get people to understand my story, that I had to let go, and kind of back to that Bible reference. You think about the rich man who's like, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, and then Jesus says, like, give up your possessions, and he's like, I can't do that. And that's what drinking was like for me for a very long time. And I had to tell a story about in 2016 when I was like, this is it. I was at an Eric Church concert at Red Rocks. He was closing the show with Alleluia. I was looking over the Denver sky, and I put my drink down. I'm like, that's it, I'm done. Like, this is the moment. And like, it didn't stick. It took 8 more years of those types of moments for me to just make the decision that I'm done. And it got better over time. Like, I'd have 100 days without drinking or 90 days without drinking, and it was good. I was leading in that direction, but finally I was like, all right, I need to be done, and really kind of moved towards this life as opposed to just moving away from drinking.
So, for our listeners out there, I would say the connective piece that you just said is, could you find one thing in your life to change? I think a lot of times, Joe, I know this, you say I'm good at analogies. I'll tell you how that all came to be was because I work with kindergarten to 12th grade students during the day. And I had to learn, how do I communicate with a kindergartner at the same level that I do a high schooler in one single day? And so what happened to me is, I didn't realize it, but I was refining my communication, but I was also building this anxiousness in me because I constantly felt like I had to meet everyone's needs. And so for me, one thing that I'm giving up, this, at least for me in the last season of life, is the need to please others. I know this. Drinking is something for me personally I choose not to do, because part of my story is my paternal grandpa died at 38 years old. And it's always been my life goal to outlive him. He was, he had so many fantastic qualities, but he was somebody who was an alcoholic. He did not treat his kids the way that I want to treat my kids. He had 4 daughters. I have 3. There's a lot of similarities. And there's nothing against him as a human, because he was a fantastic human in so many ways. But I've always battled against that internal dragon, I would call it. There's like this internal dragon that always kind of breathes that fire and says, hey, you're stressed, you should do this. Hey, you're stressed, you should feel this. And what I was realizing is, just because I said no to that didn't mean I said no to everything. And so we can kind of take some of those struggles, those external struggles, and almost manipulate and move them in our lives. And so if you're a listener and you're like, you know what, I can't give that up. Maybe giving drinking up for them is not something, or maybe it's not even a struggle for them. I think what they need to hear you say and me say is that you need to identify what is it in your life that's keeping you from being your best version. And I think that's where I've done a poor job of communicating that to people, because sometimes I'll come across as judgmental on accident. Like, I don't do this, you don't do this. But really, that's not it. It's more or less saying, okay, is there one thing that's limiting your potential today? If it is, identify it. And so I think that's where what I hear you saying, and what I would like to make sure our audience hears today, especially as dads, because there's a lot of dads out there that are struggling, but there's also a lot of dads out there that don't know that they will come into a season of struggle and how they're going to cope with that. And I think that's something we can kind of talk about right now, because as you're giving this up, you're actually replacing it with some other things, I'm sure. And so I want to hear about, what are you replacing your urge to drink with, and how is that going?
I think I'm finally in a really good place. So Pastor Craig Groeschel says it the best. You do what you do because of what you think of you. Or there's this Tony Robbins quote where it talks about, our strongest human emotion is to remain consistent with the person we believe ourselves to be. So drinking caused a lot of chaos in my life. And part of it, I liked it, because in life, we want love and certainty, but we also want some uncertainty, and we want significance, and we want connection. But For the first 2 months, 3 months, I was looking for that uncertainty. I was looking for that chaos. So I gave up drinking, and then I just dove into my business, into school, into writing, into the podcast, and I created that chaos for myself. And then I was like overwhelmed. Like, what am I doing? I'm supposed to feel better. I'm supposed to feel less anxious. But I was trying to fulfill that need for uncertainty. And so I took a step back from social media for a while, and I just started getting my priorities in line. What are the things that I want to do? And I slowed down. So I would say for anyone listening to this, you often want to just stay the person that you are. And that's why growth is so challenging, because you don't see yourself as a different person. And although giving up drinking wasn't that much of a challenge, I was looking to fulfill what it gave me in other ways. I had to step back and I had to slow that down in order to get into the season that I'm in now. And now it's building the community. It's easy. Again, I use that word alignment. It just fits with what I'm doing. So I woke up today energized to be on the call with you. I wasn't like, oh my gosh, like another podcast, I can't do this. And, I booked so many podcasts, and I scaled back a little bit and pulled back and realized, hey, like slow down, start this the first of the year. So that was probably my biggest challenge with giving up drinking, was trying to fill my life with uncertainty. And now I've figured it out a little bit.
I love that. I think we can replace a bad thing with too many good things at times. I think that's something that I've noticed, at least in my own life, is we'll pull something away like, okay, yeah, I'm done with that. But then I'll put 700 good things there, which then become that residue of, I'm like, ah. So what I would say, just kind of come full circle, because we're getting to our 30 minutes. We try to keep these for dads about anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes, because honestly, let me say this. It's not just for dads. We call it Just Call Dad, but I mean, I'm going to get all kinds of people on this podcast. I've already had people who are not dads interested, because everybody has a dad experience, right? And everybody can give communication on that. So I want to make sure I don't just narrow our audience, but busy people are going to be listening to our podcast. I want to recap a couple things for our listeners if they really want to focus in on a couple things. So I like to do 2 to 3 things at the end. First thing is, I want to talk about the book again, Your Story Matters. If you're interested in the first copy of Your Story Matters, we can absolutely link that in our description to our podcast. I went ahead and bought one off Amazon because I wanted to see what was I going to be writing in. And then, as Joe said, this one's going to be a lot more focused on faith. And so people in this book are going to tell about their faith journey. If you're a listener today and you have a different faith journey than Joe and I, that's okay. We want you to still read this book and still access the content and see what are we saying and how does our experience define the experience that you might be having as well. The last thing that I want to say about the book is this. If you have a story, you need to tell it. Don't be afraid that your story is not as powerful or as meaningful as someone else's story. The story that I'm writing about in the book is about our experience in the NICU with our youngest daughter, Amelia. Our youngest daughter was in the NICU. I was worried I was going to lose my wife and lose her in the process. And I talk about how that built anxiety in me and worry and all those things that I was afraid to share, because our baby made it through the process and other people's did not. And there's a shame element that comes with that as well. So if you feel like your story is not that important, I'm going to be honest with you, it is. Your story matters. And that's why that title is so powerful to me and in our phrase of Just Call Dad. The last thing that I want to do is I want to give you about 1 minute, 60 seconds to do an activity with me. So I do this activity in my classroom with the kids. So I'm going to give you 60 seconds. I'm going to prep you right now. I'm going to tell you all the directions, and then I'm going to let you go. Joe, you have 60 seconds to tell somebody on the other end of this podcast why, number 1, their story matters, and number 2, if you could save their life today, what would you tell them? So again, number 1, why does their story matter? And number 2, if you had advice that could save someone's life today in 60 seconds, what would you tell them? All right, Joe, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1, go.
Your story matters because it fulfills the deepest of the human needs, which is growth and contribution. We're always chasing love and significance and certainty and uncertainty, and we try to find those things on social media, but you get lost because those things aren't real. But if you really want to dive in, it's growth and contribution. So as you contribute your own story to serve and inspire others, you yourself get boosted up and you get fulfilled in your own life. And what I would tell anybody that, to kind of save their life is build a community. reach out, be vulnerable, understand that people are going through some of the same experiences that you are. And if you find that community, they will lift you up. There's a lot more good in the world than you see on the news. Reach out to the people like Sean or I or anyone in this community because they want to help and serve and inspire.
60 seconds right on the nose there, Joe. Well done. Love it.
Thank you.
That's an educator right there. I love that exercise, and I would throw that in. I know you probably have one like it. I do my 60-second exercise all the time. If you have like 1 minute and I give them a topic to convince somebody of this, or 1 minute to do whatever it might be. I was actually introduced to that by a Bible study that I was in that said you're in an elevator with somebody, you have 1 minute to tell them why Jesus loves them and why they matter. And so I've incorporated that to be able to be used in different contexts because I think it's valuable to make sure that we don't just narrow it down to faith, but we can also use personal development. So I really like that, and you can kind of paint a picture. And if I'm in the classroom, I like to give an actual timer up and see for the kids too. So
very cool.
yeah,
I love that.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, hey Joe, I really appreciate you being here on the Just Call Dad podcast, and for all of our listeners out there, I really want you to find Joe. So I will make sure to link all your stuff in our podcast description, all of the things that they can do to find you, as well as the links to the books that you have already written and the books that you are going to be a part of writing. But more importantly, I just want you to hear this from Joe and from me. Thank you for tuning in to our episode today. Thank you for listening to us, and never struggle alone. Always be just a call away. All right, let's make today the best version of that day. You got this. Just call Dad.